Hello, everybody. This is Brian Ankney with AutoSuccess Magazine. I appreciate you all taking time out of your day to join us today for an AutoSuccess webinar. My guest today is Carrie Wise from TrueCar. She is the Vice President of Dealer Marketing. And before we get started, I'd like to share a couple things with you. We're going to hold the questions until the end, and depending on what type of device you're on, the question function might work a little differently. If you're on a computer, a laptop, or a tablet, you're going to have a pane on the right side of your screen. Near the bottom it says questions. Push the plus sign right next to it and type in your questions. And as we go, please ask questions. That way we've got some good ones, in the queue right when we finish. Now, if you're using an Android or an Apple, mobile device, depending on the device manufacturer, it could work a little differently. You're either going to have a picture frame around your screen, or you might have a header, or you might have a footer. And somewhere on that frame or that header or footer will be a question mark. That question mark is where you click to ask a question, and then to get back to the webinar, depending on the device, it's also different. You can swipe and you'll go back to the webinar. Others, you'll have to click on the icon that kind of looks like a desktop monitor, like a flat screen television. So with all that being said, one more reminder: if you haven't joined AutoSuccess webinars yet on Facebook, please do. It's a group on Facebook. Just search for it. It'll come up, request to be a member. The purpose for this group is to help you with the topics that we discuss, on the webinars. A lot of these topics, it might take you a week, it might take you 6 months, it might take you 2 years to implement some of these things. And so, one, you can interact with the speakers. Two, more importantly, you can interact with each other. As you have successes and failures and try things that work and others that don't, I invite you to share that with other people that are on their way on the same journey to improve their dealership. Carrie, if you would, please take us away. We're really excited to have you here today, and everybody, thanks for coming.
Thank you so much, Brian. I appreciate you having me on. I appreciate AutoSuccess inviting me to do this webinar, and I thank you, everybody on the webinar, for taking time out your busy day to be here. I'm going to be talking about key tactics to not only survive but thrive in today's transparent marketplace. And before we begin, I want to give you a little background on TrueCar. A lot of people obviously have heard about TrueCar. What they don't really realize is that we are a network of sites. So in addition to TrueCar.com, we have member sites like AAA and Sam's Club, which we power. We have employee buying sites. We have publishers like Car and Driver and Consumer Reports, in which we power. Most people have heard of USAA and several insurance companies in which we power. And then finance companies, our newest one is Chase, but you've also probably heard of American Express and PenFed. All of these sites are powered by us, and our dealers obviously gain access to leads that come from consumers that use these different sites. But having these various sites also help us learn how dealers really customize their approach when it comes to different sources. And you're going to hear me talk a lot about that today, because often the perception that a dealer is not transparent is typically tied to a disconnect between what happens online and offline. And we'll dig into that a little bit later today. But one, I want to just start off by just framing my presentation. There's a lot of opinions out there about what the best practices are. And what I want to do is really anchor mine on two different areas. One is consumer. We have about 7 million consumers that come to our sites on a monthly basis. And so we're able to learn a lot about the automotive consumer. And we're able to track that not only from the visit, but all the way through to a sale. So we know what steps the consumer is taking before they submit a lead. We know the steps the consumer is taking that ultimately result in a sale. The other thing I want to share with you are what we've learned from our top performing dealers. Like I said, I could give you my opinion on best practices, but really the proof is when you look at dealers that have the highest close rate. And this year we went out and studied 75 of our top performing dealers. Now, by top performing, these are the dealers that had the highest close rates, and obviously they embrace transparency, at least on the TrueCar platform, by providing an upfront price. The picture you're seeing here is actually a focus group that we did with both consumers and dealers. And part of that was learning the pain points. We're always doing research so that we can adjust our approach both from a consumer and a dealer standpoint. But from a consumer standpoint, we learned a lot about their pain points when it came to buying a car. And there were really 4 major categories that came up when we talked to these consumers in focus groups nationwide. And one had to do with convenience. They talked about how they had to give the information over and over again, so repeating the same process. I really don't like the waiting. So it wasn't so much the time they spent, but it was what they were doing with their time. We've all been on the phone with someone in customer service when we gave them information, got transferred to someone else, and had to do it again. It's awfully frustrating. The second category related to customization. So I felt like I was being pushed into a car I didn't want. The whole process was about them, not me. They're bringing up things I don't care about. I think we're in a, if you think about the world we live in, we're in a world of customization. I can go to Starbucks and buy a $5 coffee and get it made exactly how I want it. You know, upside down, soy milk, non-fat, any variation, and that's $5. And imagine when someone's buying a $30,000, $35,000 car, today's consumer expects some level of customization in the process. Transparency, so it's kind of the theme of my presentation, but when we talked to consumers, they talked about, you know, there was no explanation in terms of the finances. It was a mystery algorithm. They don't tell you what you should know. Give me a roadmap or a menu showing all aspects of the deal. And the last was validation. So we heard consumers talk about that they didn't show me any information to prove the price was good, and not knowing makes me trust less. And so what we found is that our top performing dealers were able to really address these consumer pain points, but still see the ROI in terms of their performance. In fact, when we look at our top performing dealers, they have close rates that are 2 times higher than their competition. And more importantly, their market share reflects that. So if you look at the map on the right side here, the green area is the backyard of the dealership. This is the closest area around this particular dealership. What we find is that our top dealers have a market share that is 8% higher than the average in their own backyard. But what's more importantly is they tend to draw even more from outside areas. So when we look at the competition zone, these are zones where a dealer is competing head-to-head. Think of it as a jump ball in basketball. Their market share is 47% higher in competition zones and 100% higher than the average dealer in conquest zones. These are zones that are far away where they really shouldn't be closing as well. So I've shown you that these are obviously very successful dealers from an ROI standpoint. The next question we had was, well, what set these dealers apart? What did they do to achieve 2 times higher close rates and balance transparency, giving upfront information, giving validation? And what you're seeing here is something we put together. I'm going to share with you how to download this later on in the presentation. We call it the 10 Habits of Highly Successful Dealers. And today I want to go through each of these. So you don't need to be writing all these down. We're going to go through these in depth. But you can see that there are obviously some key things that these dealers are doing. Now, how did we gather this level of information? We mystery shopped these dealers. We interviewed their management. We visited them and observed their process, whether it be in the BDC or internet department, in terms of how they were handling leads. We also looked at how they were using our particular tools. And by the way, this isn't a sales pitch on TrueCar. Everything I'm talking about really can apply to any third party. So we looked at these particular dealers and came up with these. I should also add that while we came up with 10 different habits, there wasn't any dealer that did them all, right? Some dealers did some things well that you see on here. Some other dealers did other things well, but no one had it all. So I want to walk through and summarize really the themes that we saw when it came to our top performing dealers. And these were the key differentiators. One was their pricing strategy, which we're going to dig in a little later. The other part was that they had a streamlined process. By streamlined, meaning that they really connected the dots between what happened online for the consumer and what happened offline once I walked in the store. Validation. They made the consumer feel good about not only working with them as a dealer, but also the price of the vehicle and even the vehicle itself, particularly on the used side. And lastly, value, right? They presented value beyond just price. So these are the 4 areas that really stood out. And I want to break down each of these and show you some real examples that we saw in terms of our mystery shops, our interviews, that will really help you understand what I mean by each of these 10 habits. So let's start off with pricing strategy. I think when you think of these top performing dealers, the assumption is that they were priced the lowest, that they won because they just beat everybody else in terms of pricing. And we found really quite the opposite. So one is that in interviewing their management, they tended to embrace transparency. Now, that sounds very broad, but it was really from the top down. You can see some of the quotes that we got when we were interviewing some of the management of the top performing dealer. In many cases, they had a very pragmatic philosophy when it came to transparency. It wasn't that they loved giving all the information, but they felt like they had to do it given where consumers are. You can see the first dealer says, our process is designed to engage and include the customer in every step of the process. Transparency is our culture, and the tools we use in the sales process support transparency. Another dealer said, we have to because of this day and age. So very pragmatic. And the other thing is when we asked them questions about the type of information they were willing to give on the phone, for example, would you be willing to give a price quote over the phone? They were actually, the majority of them were very forthcoming with that kind of information. So philosophy was one thing. We also looked at how they use our tools. So on TrueCar, what most people don't realize is that our dealers actually price their cars. They go to a pricing tool, they price each of their models, and that's what we're presenting to the consumer. And what we're able to see is how often are dealers logging into that pricing tool? How often are they going in there and evaluating their pricing? And what we see is that our top performing dealers go into that pricing tool 1.5 times more often than the average dealer. What does that mean? That means that they're avoiding a set it and forget it pricing strategy. Even on new cars, which most would say are pretty stable relative to used car in terms of pricing, there still is variation depending on the year, or variation in your strategy. And what we often see is that when your price is stale, it doesn't help you from a competitive advantage relative to other dealers. And so these dealers are staying on top of their pricing to ensure that they're up to date and it matches their strategy at any given time. The other thing we looked at is how are these dealers pricing their cars, but more importantly, what are they selling these cars for? Are they priced lower, and is that how they're winning? And the reality is what we see is that top dealers sell at competitive prices, but not necessarily the lowest price. It's not about price. In fact, when we look at their transactions, the average top performing dealer sells at 93.6% of MSRP versus 93.7% for the average dealer. So they're priced right in line with the typical dealer. So if it's not just about price, then what is helping them succeed? And it really starts with process. I mentioned a streamlined process that really connects the dots for the consumer. So one of the first things we saw was how fast they responded, right? Our top dealers responded 2.5 times faster than the competition when we mystery shopped them. And I always reference a study that I love. It's an InsideSales.com study that shows that 50% of sales go to the very first salesperson to respond. I know it sounds pretty basic, pretty elementary, but time is really what can help you get an advantage over the competition. The other thing that we saw in mystery shopping is that they really tailored their response to the consumer. They did their homework on the consumer journey, and they acknowledged that in their response. And I think one of the things that we really emphasize, particularly on TrueCar, because we have 650 sites, is that when someone goes to samsclub.com, which is one of our sites, it's important that that salesperson says, I'm calling as the Sam's Club representative. Or if they're going through TrueCar, I'm the TrueCar representative, because the consumer went through and did all of those different steps on that site, and a generic response is not going to give them what they want in terms of customization. Here's an example of a customer. It's a real example. We did change, obviously, the address and information, but you can see that this is a level of information that a typical consumer, at least on our site, is giving the dealer. In this case, this is Robert Smith. He's a USAA customer. We know his military rank. He's a major in the U.S. Air Force. He's retired. We have all of his information, obviously, in terms of contact, but he's also told us and taken the time to tell us that he wants a tan or a white car, that he plans to trade in his Mazda 5. He's given us the number of miles on the Mazda 5 and that he would like to finance. We know that the vehicle that he configured on our site, including the savings that he was presented. And we also know what other cars he interacted with because we're showing real VINs as well. So we know that he actually liked a particular Nissan Rogue. And what we see when we mystery shop dealers, and we mystery shop thousands and thousands of dealers, is the disconnect between the online and offline. This consumer has taken 15 different steps. They spent an average of 18 minutes filling out this level of information, and when a salesperson calls them back and asks them what car they want, or is generic in their response, doesn't know this level of information, it's obviously very frustrating. Going back to those consumer pain points, you're repeating the same information over again. This consumer is on step 3 or 4 of the sales process. It's important to pick that deal up where it left off instead of starting them over on step 1. And so what we often do is we encourage our dealers, and this really applies to any third-party site for that matter, to really acknowledge the consumer journey. Hi, Major Smith. This is Travis Pennington, your certified USA representative here at Hometown Nissan. I do have the 2015 Rogue you liked in stock with great financing specials. I also see that you have a Mazda that you'd like to trade in. I'll arrange for appraisal with our used car manager when you arrive. When could you come in, right? So you're acknowledging the consumer journey. You sound like we're on the same page, and you understand the steps that I've taken online, and you're picking it up from there. Another thing that we saw in mystery shopping our top performing dealers versus the competition is they tended to personalize their response. So they didn't send just automatic emails or kind of generic emails. They at least felt customized. They also used more personal contact. We are more likely to actually get a phone call from the top performing dealers, so they picked up the phone. In some cases, we even got a text, or in the case that you're looking at, a video response, which was very effective. In fact, 80% of the time nearly, we got a custom email or contact from our top performing dealers versus about 66% of their competition. What we also see is that they tend to try to find ways to bond with the consumer. And so you can see in this case, this is a salesperson that has military background. I mentioned that we power USAA, we power PenFed, and if you're not in the military, what you may not know is military people obviously are very loyal to those organizations. USAA has a 92% loyalty rate. And so it's very important in this case that this salesperson is kind of bonding with the consumer based on a commonality, which is his experience in the military. What we also know about consumers is that they tend to change their minds, and you guys know that better than me, but I'll show you some stats to really kind of prove that. When we think about our internet leads and the percent of consumers that switch to a different make or model, it's very high. And this is pretty typical when I talk to most dealers. So you'll see here when we look at the new vehicle that's purchased by our TrueCar leads, 67% of leads, of new vehicle leads, buy a different make, model, or trim than they originally configured. So they spent 15 different steps, 18 different minutes on configuring a car, and they end up switching. You can see 33% buy the same make, model, and trim. 44% will stick with the make and model but maybe a different trim. 10% will stay with the same make but will switch to a different model, and then 13% buy a different make altogether. Now I bring that up because when we look at our top performing dealers, they tend to stay ahead of the consumer, and they proactively present vehicle options with pricing. And in this case, in our program, the offer tool that they use allows them to send a branded offer. So when we look at the usage of our offer tool, which is an optional thing for dealers, we see a much higher adoption with our top performing dealers. And what we know is that when a consumer receives an offer through this offer tool, which is really just a proxy for getting an alternative vehicle with pricing, their close rate increases by 32%. So let me rephrase that. The close rate for a dealer increases by 32% when a consumer receives this price offer on a specific vehicle. And you can see off to the right there, there's a picture of the offer. And in addition to just staying ahead of the consumer and being prepared with options because we know they're going to switch. What's also helpful in this particular offer is that it's branded. So in this case, this consumer went through PenFed. They went through that process. They trusted PenFed to connect them with a dealer within the network. And what ends up happening is if they change their mind, they still want that same level of validation through the source that they went through. So the PenFed branding definitely helps in this case. So speaking of validation, that was one of the things that when we interviewed the management of the top performing dealers, when we Mr. Shop, they did a really good job of addressing that consumer pain point, the need for validation. And one of the things I want to start with is just that they did a really good job of leveraging the third party that they were connected to. So as I mentioned, we power over 650 sites, so we can get an idea of how these dealers are using those sites to their advantage. What we like to tell dealers is lead with and lean on the consumer trusted third party. You're trying to build that trust gap, and by using and tying yourself to the third party that the consumer went through, it can only help you. Let me give you some examples of that when I say lead with a trusted source. So when we talk about your responses, and like I said, this applies to sites beyond just TrueCar, but if someone went through AARP, they spent time, they went to that site for some level of third-party validation, we tell our dealers to say, I'm your certified AARP dealer representative. Thank you for using the employee car buying service. So you're starting them off on the right foot. You're showing your ties to this third party. And if they trust that third party, you're really leveraging that trust. We call it the transfer of trust. But we also know that you could be as transparent as any other dealer in the world, but the consumer may still ask you questions or ask you to do things that are not possible. And so you could either say, look, I'm going to go talk to my manager and see if I can do that, or you could tell the consumer it's not possible. But we always say, you know, lean in on the third party again. In this case, if they went through the Sam's Club program and they got a guaranteed savings off of a certain amount, you know, lean in on that program. Your Sam's Club guaranteed savings is $3,200. It's much different than you saying the pricing came from you or your management. So lean in on these third parties. All these prices are pre-negotiated for AAA members. Let me check with your Geico policy. So these are all the different our sites, but like I said, many of you are working with other third parties, and if you're going to be writing them a check, why not leverage some of the trust that they have with consumers? Here's a couple other examples. I'm really big on video, whether it's a polished video like the one you're seeing or something that's a little more raw, but I think video really communicates well. It's not going to, I can't play this over the webinar here. It's not going to translate as well, but I'll describe it. You see two different videos here. This is a GM principal at a dealership, and you'll notice that on the right side, he has kind of an emblem, and it almost looks like a belt there. On the left side, he has nothing in front of him. Well, this dealership has created different videos depending on the TrueCar website. So on the left are TrueCar or any other non-USAA customer. They're getting that kind of generic video that's being sent out from the management. But on the right side, that's anybody from USAA, because they know that USAA really are bought into, obviously, military ties, an understanding of how the USA program works. So it's a custom video, and the GM partner here actually was a retired Marine. So he really draws on his experience, and that's his little emblem in here that represents the Marine. Once again, just kind of going back to the power of validation when it comes to pricing. You know, what we do is we look at how does validation in terms of a rating on a price impact the consumer's likelihood to submit a lead. What you're seeing on the right side are used vehicle listings. And you'll notice that on each listing, there's a TrueCar rating, whether it's a great price, whether it's a good price. And when you look at the data on the left side here, this is what we're looking at: lead conversion. So your likelihood to submit a lead to a dealer. And what we find is that consumers are much more likely to actually move forward on a particular used vehicle and submit a lead when there is a rating, no matter if that rating's great or good. Where the lead conversion drops is when we have no price rating. Maybe we don't have the information to present that to the consumer. So it kind of goes back from a validation standpoint. Validation is not about just showing the lowest or the best. It's giving them a frame of reference on how good this is compared to something else. And in this case, we see that lead conversion increases significantly by 24% when there is a rating. When we look at our top performing dealers, they were much more likely in their responses and even in observing them to reference some type of third-party benchmark. In this case, you're seeing the TrueCar curve. If a dealer is priced well relative to the TrueCar curve, they'll use that to their advantage to help the consumer feel better about moving forward. Sorry, there, I went a little far. And the last thing is validating the vehicle, particularly on the used side. What you're seeing here is actually an independent dealer. And what this dealership does is they provide a scorecard for every one of their used vehicles. If you think about an independent dealer, they don't have the advantage of that franchise flag, right? So they have to really do an even better job of proving their value. And consumers are also often skeptical about buying a used car. And so this scorecard is a way to make them feel better about, the condition of the car. And when we interviewed the principal at this dealership, he said the credibility is the one thing that separates my dealers from others, and the condition report just goes deeper into creating a credible experience for me as an independent dealer. The last thing I want to touch on is value. In the absence of value, it only becomes about price. And that's what we really see as a key differentiator. One of the things we did with the top performing dealers is we went, in addition to interviewing their management, observing how they talked about value in store, we also did a review of their website. So we took snapshots from their website to understand what are they presenting on their homepage, because what you present on your homepage is likely what you're emphasizing in other areas. And so we found that the top performing dealers had clear why-buy messaging. What you're seeing here on the screen is actually a response we got from one of the mystery shops. This is a dealer that was a little further out from the metropolitan area. They were a little more rural, and they had to do an even better job of convincing consumers to drive out to them. And so we got this response from the dealers. I understand that our dealership may seem far away, but here are a few reasons why people make the trip out to us. And they laid out 7 really great specific reasons why we should go. You'll be dealing directly with the GM. Our tax rate is lower than neighboring county. We don't have advertising fees on our invoicing. We will not do the bait and switch. You'll get the TrueCar price. If we cannot come to an agreement, we'll give you $50 to fill up your vehicle, your gas. When you purchase with us, you get tickets to the winery. And then lastly, they mentioned buyer's bonus. We're going to touch on that, but that's an ownership benefit that TrueCar pays for if a consumer purchases from one of our dealers. So you can see very clear why-buy messaging. When I go to dealers, I always ask salespeople, what differentiates you? What makes you better? And the whole thing I'm trying to figure out is, can your people articulate, whether it be in the BDC or the salespeople, what makes them different? Not generic, but something very specific that is a unique value proposition relative to other dealers. And if you can't, then you can't necessarily blame that consumer for focusing in just on price. One of the things we also see is that they tend to emphasize unique value proposition related to their people or their process. So you can see the dealership on the left side. This is a program that the dealer has that's called the Power of One. As part of that program, they have one price. You'll deal with one person from the cradle to grave, and they'll get you in and out in 1 hour when you agree upon the vehicle. So not every dealer can do this. I'm not emphasizing this to tell you to adopt it. I'm emphasizing this to say that this dealer does a great job of marketing that value. If you look on their website, you see it everywhere. When people answer the phone, they talk about the Power of One. And so it's a marketing campaign that's consistent. And by the way, it's touching on some consumer pain points that we saw earlier. On the right side, this is just a snapshot from a dealership's website. They emphasize the fact that they have product specialists. These are non-commissioned representatives that are going to help you find the right car. So once again, they're emphasizing a unique value that ties to how they pay their people and how their people are incentivized. Ownership benefits are always great for consumers, right? They want to know, I'm going to buy the car, and I may be at your dealership for 4 hours, but I'm going to own that car for years and years and years. So I want to know what I can get during the lifetime of owning the vehicle. You can see on the top there, this is on one of the dealership's website. They make it very clear all the different benefits you're going to get from buying from this dealership. Courtesy vehicles, airport shuttles, car washes, we're pet-friendly, shoe shine, guest lounges, multi-point inspection. And so it's just very crystal clear. You can also see on the bottom right there, this is a dealership that emphasizes their discounts, their bonus perks, their inspections. So they make it very clear what makes them different relative to other dealers. I had mentioned buyer's bonus. One of the dealerships earlier had mentioned that in one of their why buy messaging in an email. Buyer's bonus is a program where we actually cover ownership benefits if a consumer purchases from a TrueCar dealer. In this case, they get auto repair expense reimbursement up to $1,000 in a year and auto deductible reimbursement up to $1,000 in a year. And what we do is we'll look at, how are our top performing dealers using this particular value? What we find is that their customers are 2 times more likely to actually redeem buyer's bonus benefits. That means that they're emphasizing it more in the process. And what we find is that when a sale has buyer's bonus, which is basically some ownership benefit, that sale will close 35% faster than any TrueCar sales without it. So once again, it's just an example of the power of having value. Not only from a consumer standpoint, but also from an ROI standpoint in terms of moving cars faster. So that's all I have for you. I've gone through all of these 10 habits, and what I want to encourage you guys to do is to download the 10 habits. It's this infographic you're seeing here. You can go to TrueCar.com/topdealers and download the full infographic. I'd also be happy to email you this presentation if you want to pass it on to anybody in your store. You can reach me at kwise@truecar.com, and I'm also on Twitter at kkwise11. So I want to thank you guys so much for your time, and thank you so much for AutoSuccess having me on the webinar. I hope you guys got something out of this. And Brian, if you want to bring up any questions that anybody brought up, I'd be happy to answer.
Fantastic. Great job, Carrie. We do have some questions ready, and I'll remind everybody, go to the right side of your screen or go to the picture frame around your phone and type in your questions now. Our first question is the price comparison how they price their cars or what they are selling them for?
Yeah, so I had mentioned earlier that top dealers price at the same rate as average dealers. I think it was 96.6 and 96.7 of MSRP, and that is what they're transacting at. So it's not what they're pricing at. Because a dealer could price at the same rate and then ultimately sell it for something lower. We're looking at ultimately what they sold it at, and they're selling at the same level as an average dealer. Great question.
Good. Okay, great. And actually, you know what? This is just a really nice comment. Validation goes to Carrie because she is awesome.
Oh, great. Thank you. Oh, I appreciate it. I promise that wasn't a mole that I invited on. So thank you for that.
All right. What is the closing percentage for the best dealers that your top dealers?
That's a tough one because it varies by brand. So purposely, what we did, was we looked at how they compared to their competitors. So when you say 2 times, they're basically 200% greater from a close rate standpoint than the their competitive dealers. But in terms of the actual close rate, that can vary significantly by brand and by region as well.
Okay. Should we use the logos like AARP in our responses?
I think you should, where you can. I know it's not always possible to do that. We power 650 different sites, so it becomes a little more challenging. But I would encourage you, where you can, to tie as much to the third party that the consumer came from. And for us, what I like to say is, look, you might not be able to be an expert on all 650, but you might look at your top 3 to 5 lead sources. And so let's say USAA is one of them. You're probably going to want a USAA template that really ties into the fact that you're a USAA dealer and that you're offering the USAA pricing. It goes a long way from a consumer standpoint. So yes, I believe in branding as much as you can, tying to the trusted source that the consumer went through.
Okay. What percentage of your dealers are top dealers?
We're only looking at 70. So in this particular study, which we're constantly doing these things, but we were looking at 75 dealers. So that's a very small percentage of our dealers. If you look at we have 12,500 dealers on our program. I will tell you that when we chose these 75 dealers, we were very strategic in making sure that we looked at competitive markets. So we didn't look at markets where there weren't as many dealers, or dealers didn't really have to compete, because the reality is that you could have a really high close rate because you're on your own as a dealer. You're not competing against another dealer. So we looked at the top 15 metros, and then we also wanted to make sure that these were dealers that had a significant amount of leads. They had to be at least getting a minimum of 100 leads that we were looking at in terms of close rate, because we didn't want to base close rate on a dealer that only had 5 leads and it wasn't very significant. So this is just a case study in some ways of 75 of our top dealers.
Okay. Well, it looks like that's all the questions that we have for today, Carrie. Thank you for taking the time to share all this information with everybody. We hope to have you back again.
Great.
Everybody that's on the call, if you haven't yet, I want to remind you again, join AutoSuccess webinars. We got another question coming in. How can we have you speak at our dealership? How can somebody have you speak at a dealership?
So I'd be happy to do that. So what I would encourage you to do is just send me an email at kwise@truecar.com, and we'll make some arrangements. Yeah. So let me know.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. He says we will email you. Sounds
okay.
Good.
Sounds good. And if you want everyone, I'd be happy to send that out as well for everybody on the line. Just reach out to me, or Brian has it as well. So.
Yep. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Just one more time, her email is kwise@truecar.com. It's KWISE. And if you happen to be driving or you don't have a pen, you're going to get all of you will get an email from me thanking you for coming tomorrow. And so you're welcome to respond. That's my real email address, and I'll get that response to Carrie so she can send you the presentation. One thing before I let her.
Oh, I'm sorry, Brian, to talk over you. I was just.
Oh no, go ahead,
Carrie,
please.
Yeah. I was just going to tell everybody that if you're at NADA, I hope to see you guys there at the end of January, and we'll obviously have a booth there, and I will be at the booth as well. So email me, Twitter, but I'll be in person at NADA.
Perfect. Yeah, for everybody on the call, please join AutoSuccess webinars on Facebook. And if there's a person that you would like to see on a webinar, or a certain topic that for some reason we're not hitting that you would love to see, please, reach out to me, or I'll get an email from me tomorrow. It's brian@autosuccessonline.com, Brian with an I. Please let me know what you guys would like to see, and I'll do my best to try to find it for you. Thank you all for taking the time out of your day today. Carrie, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this presentation. Is there anything you'd like to share with our listeners before we let them go today?
No, I just appreciate your time. I know how busy you guys are, and I hope you got something out of this that you could actually bring back to your stores. So thank you so much for being here.
All right. Well, everybody, have a great afternoon. Hope to see you again soon.